Jake Morrison had been fixing things on Haven Point Space Station for 6 straight years, long enough that the endless hum of machinery and the faint metallic tang of recycled air felt more like home than any planet ever had. The station was a sprawling neutral hub orbiting a dim red dwarf, where human Serini diplomats, Krull engineers, and a dozen other species pretended to get along while quietly pursuing their own agendas. Jake's job was simple: keep the doors opening, the lights staying on, and the life support from deciding today was the day to asphyxiate everyone. Most days he liked the predictability. Most days nothing interesting happened. That particular shift started like any other. The maintenance dispatch pinged his wristpad at 0400 station time. Panel malfunction in corridor 4B, cabin 47C. Faulty maglock on the entry door. Resident reporting intermittent failures. Jake grabbed his toolkit. A battered gray case that had seen more alien tech than most humans ever would double-check the cabin number and headed out. The corridors were quiet at that hour, only the soft whoosh of ventilation and the occasional distant clank of automated repair drones. He passed a pair of Krull technicians arguing in low clicks about coolant ratios and nodded politely, even though they never nodded back. When he reached the section, the signage was glitchy. Half the holographic labels flickered, swapping numbers like a drunk playing cards. 47C read as 41C for a split second, then back again. Jake frowned, tapped the panel. It stabilized on 47C. Good enough. He ran his override fob across the lock. The door hissed open with a reluctant sigh, the emergency protocol kicking in because the resident hadn't answered the chime. Standard procedure, no big deal. He stepped inside and immediately knew something was wrong. The cabin was dim, lit only by a soft cascade of bioluminescent crystals arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. In the center knelt a Serini female. Her silver-blue skin shimmered with faint inner light, long ears swept back in an elegant arc, and her eyes wide. Luminous violet locked onto him the instant the door opened. She wore nothing but a thin ceremonial wrap that had slipped partially from her shoulders, exposing the delicate tracery of glowing veins that pulsed across her collarbone and down her arms. Small crystalline shards hovered around her in slow orbit, refracting her light into tiny rainbows that danced across the walls. Jake froze, his brain short-circuited. This wasn't a faulty door panel. This wasn't maintenance. This was private. Sacredly, catastrophically private. The Serini Lyrish, though he wouldn't learn her name for hours, yet made a sound that was half gasp, half keening wail. Her ears flattened tight against her skull. The bioluminescence in her skin flared in sharp, panicked pulses, and the hovering crystals shattered into sparks that rained harmlessly to the deck. She scrambled backward, clutching the wrap to her chest, eyes wide with something beyond embarrassment, something like grief, like violation. Jake stammered. I'm sorry, wrong cabin, I thought. He backed up so fast he hit the doorframe, toolkit clattering. The door tried to close but caught on his boot. He yanked it free and stumbled into the corridor, heart hammering so hard he could taste copper. Behind him, the door sealed with a definitive click. He stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the now correctly labeled 41C. The sign had fixed itself. Of course it had. He had just walked in on a Serini during Sharvana the Unveiling. He'd heard rumors about it from other human techs who'd been on station longer. A ritual of absolute solitude. The removal of emotional armor. The deliberate exposure of raw feeling to specially attuned crystals, so the individual could process suppressed affect without shattering their public composure. To witness it was to see someone at their most defenseless. To witness it uninvited was, in Serini culture, an act so profound it triggered ancient binding law, Cathara. The bond of inner truth. Jake didn't know the term yet. All he knew was that he had probably just ruined someone's life. He reported the incident immediately. Protocol demanded it. His supervisor, a grizzled human named Reyes, listened to the story with raised eyebrows and a sigh that said this was above his pay grade. You didn't mean to, Reyes said, but intent doesn't matter with them. The Serenity Embassy is already requesting a formal meeting. You're confined to quarters until we sort this. Jake spent the next 12 hours pacing his tiny bunk room, replaying the moment in his head. The way her ears had flattened. The shattered crystals. The raw terror in those violet eyes. He felt sick. He'd spent his career fixing things, not breaking them. Not breaking people. At 1600 the summons came. Not to security, to the Serenity diplomatic wing. He was escorted by 2 tall stone-faced Serenity guards, whose armor gleamed like liquid mercury. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The walk felt like a funeral procession. Lirish waited in a small mediation chamber. She had changed into formal robes, deep indigo threaded with silver, but the tension in her posture hadn't eased. Her ears were still half lowered, and her eyes, though calm now, carried shadows. A third Serenity, older, with frost-white streaks in her hair, stood beside her. Ambassadorial aide, probably. Jake bowed awkwardly. "Ma'am, I can't tell you how sorry I am. The signage failed. I used emergency override. I never meant." Lyra raised a hand. Her voice was soft, melodic, but edged with steel. "The error in the station systems is not in question, Technician Morrison. What is in question is what you witnessed." She paused, as if gathering courage. "You saw me in Sharvana, the unveiling. No outsider has ever seen a Serenity in that state and remained unbound. Our law is clear. Kathara has formed between us. You are now bound to understand what you saw. I am bound to teach you. Refusal or ignorance on either side risks permanent psychic fracture for me." Jake blinked. "Bound? Like, forever?" "Not forever," the aide interjected, "but for as long as it takes to restore balance. You will attend sessions with Lyrish. You will learn our ways. She will explain the ritual, its necessity, its sanctity. Only through comprehension can the wound begin to heal." Jake looked at Lyra. She met his gaze steadily, though her fingers trembled slightly at her sides. "I do not blame you for the accident," she said quietly. "But I cannot pretend it did not happen. If we ignore this, the shame will eat at me until nothing remains. I ask you to help me carry this burden until it becomes bearable." He swallowed. "I'll do whatever it takes." "I swear." The aide nodded. "Then it is sealed. Sessions begin tomorrow. 1 hour daily, no recordings, no witnesses. Only the 2 of you." As Jake was escorted out, Lyra spoke once more, almost too soft to hear. "Thank you for not running." He didn't know what to say to that. So he simply nodded and let the doors close behind him. That night, alone in his quarters, Jake stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what it must have felt like for her. To have every carefully constructed wall torn down in an instant, every hidden feeling laid bare before a stranger. A human stranger. He thought about how Serenity always appeared so composed, cool, elegant, untouchable. How much effort that must take. How much they must hold inside. He didn't sleep much. The next morning, he arrived at the mediation chamber 5 minutes early. Toolkit left behind. This wasn't a repair job anymore. This was something far more delicate. Lyra was already there, seated on a low cushion, crystals arranged in a smaller pattern between them. No hovering shards this time, just quiet light. She gestured for him to sit. "We begin with basics," she said. "Sharvana is not indulgence. It is survival. Our species evolved in environments of constant threat. To show emotion openly was to invite attack. So we learned to contain it, to armor the heart. But armor, left on too long, crushes the wearer. Sharvana is the release valve, private, sacred, unwitnessed." Jake listened, trying to absorb every word. "And when it is witnessed," he asked carefully. Her ears flicked. "Then the witness becomes part of the release. They carry a piece of that vulnerability. The bond ensures they treat it with care, or both suffer." He nodded slowly. "So I'm supposed to understand you, really understand?" "Yes," she said. "And in time, perhaps more than understand." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Lyra reached out and placed one crystal in his palm. It was warm. It pulsed faintly in time with her heartbeat. "Lesson 1, she whispered. "This is trust. Begin here." Jake closed his fingers around it gently. He had no idea how deep this path would go. But for the first time since stepping through that door, he didn't feel like he was falling. He felt like he was being invited in. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 2. 18S Fast 20 Sources 2. Here's Chapter 2 of the story, continuing directly from Chapter 1. Written in detailed paragraph form and exactly 1,400 words. The mediation chamber smelled faintly of ozone and crushed Starbloom Lyrish's preferred calming incense. The lighting had been dialed down to a gentle amber glow that made the walls seem to breathe. Jake sat cross-legged on the thin cushion opposite her, the single crystal still resting in his open palm like a tiny living heartbeat. It no longer pulsed quite in time with hers. Instead, it had settled into a slow, steady rhythm that somehow matched the quiet thump in his own chest. He wasn't sure whether that was progress or coincidence. Either way, he didn't dare move his hand. Lyra sat with perfect posture, knees tucked beneath her, the hem of her indigo robe pooling around her like spilled ink. Her ears were no longer pinned flat in distress, but they remained alert, tipped slightly forward, as though listening to sounds he couldn't hear. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Humans are loud inside," she said. Not accusingly, just an observation, the way one might note that gravity pulls downward. "Your thoughts tumble over each other like stones in a river." "It is distracting." Jake gave a small, rueful smile. "Sorry, I'm trying to focus. Do not apologize for being what you are. Simply observe it." She reached forward and touched the crystal between them with one slender fingertip. A faint ripple of violet light traveled from her skin into the shard, then back again. "This is called a memra. It does not judge, it only remembers. What you feel when you hold it is what you truly carry. No mask, no performance." He looked down at the warm fragment. "Right now it feels heavy, not weight, exactly. More like regret that's still settling." Lyra nodded once. "That is honest. Regret is the first layer. Beneath it lies fear. Beneath fear, curiosity. Beneath curiosity." She trailed off, ears flicking. "We will reach that layer when you are ready." She withdrew her hand and folded both of hers in her lap. "Today we speak of the unveiling itself. Not the ceremony you interrupted, but what it means to perform it alone. Sharvana is performed once every cycle, roughly your 37 standard days. The exact interval varies by individual. It is tied to the rhythm of our emotional compression. When the pressure inside becomes unsustainable, the body signals readiness. Crystals are attuned in advance. The space is sealed. No sound, no interruption, no witness, ever." Jake shifted slightly. "And if someone does witness?" Her gaze dropped to the memra. "In antiquity, it was death for both parties. The witness was killed to preserve dignity. The unveiled often chose self-termination rather than live with the exposure. Later the law evolved. Kethara, the binding, was instituted as a compromise. The witness is not permitted to leave the knowledge behind. They must carry it, understand it, integrate it. In exchange, the unveiled is spared the full psychic fracture. The burden is shared. So I'm basically your emotional support human now?" A faint, fleeting smile curved her lips, the first he had seen. It was small, careful, like sunlight touching frost. A crude, but not inaccurate summary. She exhaled slowly, the sound almost a sigh. "I have performed Sharvana 43 times in my life. Each time I emerge. Lighter, calmer in public, more effective in negotiations. The embassy depends on that composure. I am their lead xenocultural liaison precisely because I can contain what others cannot. Until yesterday." Jake felt the memra grow warmer against his skin. "I didn't mean to take that from you. You did not take it. The accident took it. The law merely assigns responsibility." She lifted her eyes to his again. "What I lost was control over who knew me. What I gained unexpectedly was someone who might one day know me without fear or pity. He didn't know how to respond to that. So he asked the next safest question. What were you doing exactly when I walked in? The crystals were moving. Your skin was glowing brighter than usual. Lyra hesitated. For the first time since the session began, a faint flush of deeper indigo crept along the edges of her ears. The unveiling has stages. The first is release, allowing suppressed affect to surface without censorship. Emotion becomes visible as bioluminescent patterns. The second is projection, directing that effect into the attuned crystals. They absorb, refract, and return it in a purified form. The third. She paused again, longer this time. The third is communion. The self touches the purified reflection. It is intimate, vulnerable beyond words. That was the moment you entered. Jake swallowed. I saw you at your most private. And I just stood there like an idiot. You stood there for 4.7 seconds, she said dryly. Then you attempted to flee. The attempt was sincere. Despite himself, he laughed a short, startled sound. You timed it? Serene memory is precise when emotion is involved. Her tone softened. You did not stare. You did not record. You did not mock. Those are the reactions we are taught to expect from other species. Your first instinct was to protect my privacy, even though you did not understand why it mattered. That is why I did not demand your exile. The memra pulsed once, sharply, as though agreeing. They sat in silence for several minutes. Jake let the weight of her words settle. He had spent most of his adult life moving from station to station, fixing what was broken and leaving before anyone could ask him to stay. Relationships, human or otherwise, had always felt temporary, optional. This felt the opposite, inescapable, and strangely wanted. Lyra spoke again, quieter. There is something else you should know. Cathora is not static. The longer the bond continues without resolution, the deeper it roots. Thoughts begin to echo. Dreams may cross. Eventually, if left untended, the boundary between self and other blurs. That is why the sessions are mandatory and frequent until balance is restored. Jake raised an eyebrow. So if we don't do this right, we might end up sharing a brain? Not quite, but you would feel my grief when I grieve. I would taste your loneliness when you are alone. Neither of us would be able to hide. He considered that. I don't have much to hide. Everyone has something, she replied. Even humans who believe they are transparent. The session timer chimed softly. 60 minutes had passed. Lyra rose gracefully, robes whispering against the deck. Tomorrow we continue. Bring no tools. Bring only yourself. Jake stood as well, still holding the mumra. Should I give this back? Keep it, she said. It will help you remember what honesty feels like. When it cools, you have begun to forgive yourself. When it warms again without prompting, you have begun to forgive me. He slipped the crystal into his pocket. It nestled against his thigh like a second heartbeat. As he reached the door, Lyra called after him. Jake Morrison. He turned. Thank you for staying, she said simply. He nodded once, throat tight, and stepped into the corridor. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. He replaced a faulty relay in environmental control, recalibrated a grav plating junction, answered 3 routine pings from Riaz. None of it felt real. The meditation chamber felt smaller that morning, as though the walls had drawn in closer to listen. The amber lighting had shifted to a deeper violet, mirroring the color that sometimes rippled across Lyra's skin when her emotions ran high. 2 memra rested between them on the low table, one in front of Jake, one in front of her, both glowing with soft, steady light. Jake noticed immediately that his crystal was warmer than yesterday, almost hot against his fingertips. He didn't mention it. He suspected she already knew. Lyra sat with her hands resting lightly on her knees, palms up, as though ready to receive something invisible. Her ears were forward now, fully attentive, but there was a tension in the set of her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She studied him for several long seconds before speaking. Fear, she said, the word hanging in the air like a held breath. It is the second layer. Not the loud fear of immediate danger, but the quiet one. The fear that lives beneath the surface, the one we pretend does not exist until it shapes every decision we make. Today we name it. Jake nodded, though his mouth had gone dry. He'd spent years avoiding this kind of introspection. Fixing things was easier than fixing himself. But the memra in his hand pulsed once, as if reminding him there was no running now. Lyra touched her crystal first. A faint thread of indigo light spiraled up from it, thin as a whisper, and drifted toward the center of the table. "I will show you mine," she said quietly. "Then you will show me yours. The bond requires reciprocity. No hiding." The thread of light thickened, weaving into a delicate, translucent shape, a memory made visible. Jake watched as it formed the image of a young Serene girl, no more than a child, standing alone in a vast crystal cavern. The cavern walls were alive with light, but the girl's skin was dim, almost gray. Her ears were pinned flat. She clutched a small memra to her chest, but it gave off no glow. "This was me," Lyra said. "At the age when most Serene first attempt Sharvana. My family had high expectations. I was to be a diplomat's daughter, poised, controlled, flawless. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I released my emotions, they would prove too strong, too wild. That I would break the crystals, that I would break myself. So I refused to perform the ritual. I hid the fear behind perfect composure." For years, the image shifted. The girl grew older, now standing in a diplomatic hall surrounded by tall, elegant Serene and other species. She smiled perfectly, moved gracefully, spoke with flawless calm. But the memra in her hand, now a necklace, remained dark. "I became very good at containment," Lyra continued. "So good that the embassy promoted me quickly. But containment is not the same as strength. Every suppressed feeling became a weight. Every time I smiled when I wanted to scream, the weight grew heavier, until the cycle when I could no longer breathe under it. I performed Sharvana alone, in secret, terrified that someone would discover how much I had hidden. The image dissolved into sparks that drifted upward and vanished. The thread of light retracted back into her memra. "Now you," she said softly. "Show me your fear." Jake stared at his crystal. He had no idea how to do what she had just done. I don't know how." "Touch it," she instructed. "Let yourself remember. The memra will do the rest. Trust it." He closed his eyes and placed both hands around the crystal. It was almost too warm now, like holding a living coal. He thought of the first time he'd felt truly afraid, not of death, but of being seen, of mattering, of failing someone who depended on him. The light rose from his memra, hesitant at first, then steadier. It formed a memory. A teenage Jake on Earth, standing in the doorway of his mother's hospital room. She was small in the bed, tubes everywhere, her hand too weak to hold his. He had promised to fix the broken ventilator unit himself, something he'd learned from watching maintenance crews. He'd worked all night in the basement workshop, hands shaking, terrified that if he failed, she would die. He hadn't failed. The machine worked. But she died anyway, 2 days later. The image lingered, young Jake sitting alone in the workshop after, staring at his oil-stained hands, feeling the weight of uselessness settle into his bones. He had fixed the machine, but he hadn't fixed her. He hadn't been enough. The light wavered, then steadied again. Another memory rose beside it. Years later, on a mining colony station. A colleague, Maria, had been trapped in a collapsing corridor during a hull breach. Jake had been the nearest tech. He'd tried to override the emergency bulkheads, reroute power, anything. He got the doors open, just in time to see her crushed beneath the falling plates. He had been too slow, too late. The two memories hung side by side in the air between them. The boy who couldn't save his mother, the man who couldn't save his friend. Both wearing the same expression of quiet, crushing guilt. Jake opened his eyes. The images faded slowly, the light retreating into the crystal. It was cooler now, almost cold. Lyra watched him without speaking for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was gentle. Your fear is not of danger. It is of inadequacy. Of being the one who arrives just a moment too late. Of being the one who fixes everything except the thing that matters most. Jake swallowed hard. Yeah, that about sums it up. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his, the first time she had touched him. Her skin was cool, smooth, faintly luminous, and yet you continue to fix things. You continue to try. That is courage, even if you do not feel it. He looked down at their joined hands. I walked in on you at your most vulnerable and I froze. I didn't know what to do. I still don't. You stayed, she said simply. You came back. You are here now, letting me see your fear. That is more than most would do. The memory between them pulsed in unison, a slow, shared rhythm. For the first time, Jake felt something shift inside him. Not a fix, not a repair, but a loosening. Like a knot that had been tied too tight for years, finally beginning to slacken. Lyra withdrew her hand slowly. Fear is not the enemy, she said. It is the teacher. It shows us what we value. You value lives. You value responsibility. You value being enough. That is not weakness. That is purpose. She leaned back, ears relaxing slightly. We have named it. Tomorrow we move to the third layer, curiosity. The layer where fear begins to transform into wonder. Jake exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Curiosity about what? About each other, she said. About what happens when two beings who have carried their fears alone decide to carry them together. The session timer chimed. They rose in silence. As Jake reached the door, Lyra spoke again. Jake, he turned. The crystal in your pocket, she said. It is warmer now than it was yesterday. Do you feel it? He nodded. Yeah, it's comfortable. She smiled, that small, careful smile that felt like a gift. Then you are beginning to forgive yourself. Keep it close tonight. It will help you sleep. He stepped into the corridor, the crystal a steady warmth against his thigh. That evening, back in his quarters, he lay on his bunk and held the memra in his hand. It glowed softly, violet light painting the ceiling. For the first time in years, he didn't replay the failures. Instead, he thought about the girl in the crystal cavern who had been afraid to break. About the woman who had learned to contain everything until she almost broke herself. He thought about how she had looked at his memories without judgment. How she had touched his hand and called his fear courage. The crystal warmed again, as though agreeing. He closed his eyes and for the first time in a long time, slept without dreams of being too late. The next morning he arrived early, carrying nothing but himself and the memra. Lyra was waiting, 3 crystals arranged in a triangle between them this time. Her eyes were bright, almost playful. Today, she said, we ask questions, no answers required. Only honesty, only curiosity. Jake sat. I'm ready. She touched the first crystal. Then let us begin. The room filled with soft, wondering light. The violet light in the meditation chamber had deepened overnight, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the color of their shared memories, and now reflected it back in quiet invitation. 3 memra rested on the low table in a perfect equilateral triangle. 1 for Liresh, 1 for Jake, and a third new unclaimed glowing with a soft neutral silver that seemed to wait. Jake noticed it immediately as he entered. Lyra was already seated, her posture relaxed for the first time since their sessions began. Her ears were lifted high, the bioluminescent tracery along her collarbone, pulsing in slow, contented waves rather than sharp alarm. She gestured to the empty cushion. Sit. Today is different. Jake lowered himself carefully, eyes on the third crystal. That one's new. Yes. Lyra touched it lightly with one fingertip. The silver glow brightened for a moment, then settled. It is the anchor. When curiosity has been explored and wonder acknowledged, the bond reaches its final stage. Integration. The separate burdens become shared strength. The separate selves become something more, He felt his heart kick once hard. More how? She met his gaze without flinching. We decide, together, whether to let the bond fade naturally, as most Kethera eventually do, or to make it permanent. Permanent does not mean ownership. It means choice. It means choosing to carry each other's truths, even when the law no longer requires it. Jake exhaled slowly. And if we choose to let it fade, then the memories remain, but the echoes quiet. We would still understand one another deeply. We would still care. But the daily awareness, the way your loneliness would brush against my grief, the way my wonder would color your courage, would dim over time, like stars at dawn. He looked down at his own memra. It was warmer than ever, almost feverish against his palm. And if we choose permanent? Her voice softened to something almost reverent. Then the boundary between us thins permanently. Not erased. Serene and human are too different for that, but permeable. You would feel my joy when I laugh at a diplomat's clumsy joke. I would taste your satisfaction when a stubborn relay finally clicks into place. Our dreams would sometimes overlap. Our silences would never be entirely alone again. Jake turned the crystal slowly between his fingers. That sounds intimate. It is the most intimate bond our people know, she confirmed. Rarer than mating, deeper than friendship. Most who form Kethera never reach this point. Most fear losing themselves. But I have carried solitude long enough. And I believe you have as well. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed his eyes and let the memra do what it had been teaching him to do. Listen. Beneath the surface noise of his thoughts, doubt, hope, the old reflex to run lay something quieter. Something that felt like recognition. When he opened his eyes again, Lyra was watching him with patient violet light in her gaze. I have a question, he said. Ask. When you first saw me standing in the doorway, when the crystals shattered and you realized what had happened, did you hate me? Her ears flicked once, a small, honest gesture. For 3 heartbeats, yes. I hated the accident. I hated the station's failing systems. I hated that my most private moment had been witnessed by someone who could never understand it. But you were not the accident. You were the one who bowed and apologized and backed away without staring. In the next 3 heartbeats, the hate turned to fear, not of you, but of what would happen next. And in the 3 after that, she paused, the glow along her skin brightening. In the 3 after that, I felt something I had not felt in decades, relief. Because you stayed. Because you came back. Because you were willing to carry this with me instead of running from it. Jake felt the memra pulse in agreement. I've spent most of my life fixing things from the outside, he said quietly. Never letting anyone close enough to see the cracks in me. When I walked into your cabin, I didn't just see you unveiled. I saw what I'd been avoiding in myself. The part that wants to be enough. The part that's terrified it never will be. And you looked at that part without flinching. You called it courage. Lyra reached across the triangle and placed her hand over his, covering both his skin and the memra he held. Because it is. The 3rd crystal flared suddenly, silver light threading upward in delicate spirals that wove between the violet of hers and the warm amber that had begun to rise from his. The 3 lights met in the center, blending into a soft white that filled the chamber like dawn breaking inside a closed room. Jake felt it then, the thinning of the boundary she had described. Not a rush, not an invasion, a gentle merging. He tasted starbloom on the back of his tongue, felt the faint vibration of crystal song in his bones. He sensed the weight she had carried for so long, the pressure of perfect composure, the loneliness of being the one who never cracked. And she felt his, the echo of hospital corridors, the crunch of collapsing steel, the quiet conviction that he would always arrive 1 second too late. Neither of them pulled away. The light held for a long moment, then slowly dimmed until only the 3 memra glowed softly on the table. Lyra spoke first, voice barely above a whisper. The choice is not mine alone. Jake looked at the anchor crystal. It had taken on faint violet amber veins, as though it had already begun to remember them both. I don't want to go back to being alone inside my head, he said. Not now that I know what it feels like not to be. Her ears lifted fully, the highest expression of trust and joy a Serene could show. Then we choose together. He reached for the anchor crystal at the same moment she did. Their fingers met around it. The moment they touched the surface together, the silver flared once bright, painless, and settled into a steady, gentle glow that matched the rhythm of two heartbeats now beating in quiet synchrony. The bond did not roar into permanence, it simply was. Like gravity, like breath, like the hum of the station that had brought them together by accident, and now held them by choice. They sat in silence for a long time afterward, hands still joined around the anchor. No words were needed. The memra carried them. Eventually Lyra spoke, a trace of her old dry humor returning. The embassy will be insufferable. They will want reports. They will want to study this. They will probably compose poetry about the human who walked through the wrong door and stayed. Jake chuckled. Let them. I'll just keep fixing relays and showing up here every day. Same as always. Not quite the same, she murmured. Now when you fix something, I will feel the satisfaction in my own chest. And when I navigate a difficult negotiation, you will taste the relief when it ends well. He squeezed her hand once. Sounds like a fair trade. The session timer chimed, but neither of them moved. Protocol no longer mattered. The law had been satisfied long ago. What remained was theirs alone. When they finally stood, the three memra remained on the table, glowing in quiet harmony. Lyra left one behind deliberately. For the next time you feel too late, she said. It will remind you that you are exactly when you need to be. Jake slipped his own into his pocket beside the first one she had given him. They felt lighter now. Not weightless, truth never is, but balanced. At the door he paused. Lyrish, she turned. Thank you, he said simply. For not running when I walked in. She smiled open, unguarded, radiant. Thank you for not running when I asked you to stay. He stepped.
Ratas. Chale, güey. Qué estupidez, güey. No aprendes. Chale, güey, sí, no. Por eso les dije, güey, sí se mamaron con el audio, güey. Llegué, güey, lo primero que le iba a decir era, buenas tardes, hermano. Hola, pendejos, soy el anticristo, güey. Hola, pendejos de mierda. Y yo, chale. Y me fui, compadres. Hola, Heriberto, ¿cómo estás, hermano? Bienvenido. Oh, ¿qué quiere el Edu? Salió clip viril. Desgraciado, sí se mamó, güey. Qué mamada.